The security guard's hand moved to his handcuffs before I even stepped out of my car. Blue and red lights flashed behind me. A patrol vehicle that looked almost like a cop car. Almost. The uniform seemed almost official. Almost. The badge looked almost real. Almost. But I've spent 15 years studying the difference between almost and actual, between pretenders and the real thing. Step out of the vehicle, now. His voice carried the confidence of a man who had never been questioned, never been challenged, never faced someone who knew exactly what he was doing wrong. I reached for my door handle slowly. In my jacket pocket, something waited, something that would change everything, but not yet. Let them show me who they really are first. 3 weeks after my Aunt Michelle Carter passed away, I drove to Willow Creek for the first time. The inheritance papers sat in my briefcase on the passenger seat. 1,000 acres of land that I never knew existed until a lawyer called me with the news. Before we go any further, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. Because what happened at that gate changed everything I thought I knew about justice, power, and the people who abuse both. The road leading to the community was lined with oak trees, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out the afternoon sun. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, something felt wrong, too controlled, too quiet, too perfect. The gate appeared around a bend. Tall iron bars topped it with decorative spikes. Security cameras are mounted on stone pillars. A guard booth with tinted windows, and a sign listing 47 community rules in font, so small you'd need a magnifying glass to read them all. I slowed my car to a stop, rolled down my window, and waited. That's when the lights hit my rearview mirror, blue and red, flashing in alternating patterns. A white SUV with Willow Creek Security painted on the side pulled up behind me, blocking any retreat. 2 men stepped out in black uniforms with utility belts loaded with equipment. Everything about them was designed to look like law enforcement. The vehicles, the lights, the badges. But I've spent 15 years learning to spot the difference between authority and theater. These men were actors on a stage they had built themselves. The taller one reached my window with his hand already on his cuffs. His nameplate read, J. Brown. Before I could speak, he yanked my door open. Out, now, hands where I can see them. I stepped out slowly, keeping my movements deliberate. His partner circled behind me, positioning himself at my back. Standard containment formation, textbook intimidation. License and registration, Brown demanded. I handed over my documents. He barely glanced at them before tossing them onto my car's hood. You're not in our system. No resident sticker. No visitor pass. I explained calmly that my aunt had recently passed away and left me property within this community. I was here to inspect what I had inherited. Brown's lip curled. Property. He grabbed my arm and spun me toward my car, pressing me against the doorframe. Nobody owns anything in Willow Creek without board approval, and I don't remember approving you. His partner pulled my briefcase from the passenger seat and began rifling through it. Sir, that contains legal documents. You have no right to search. Brown's hand pressed harder against my back. I have every right. Section 12 of our security charter. All vehicles and personal effects are subject to inspection upon entry. He recited it like scripture, a rule they had invented to justify anything they wanted to do. I filed the violation away mentally. Illegal search, unlawful detainment, physical restraint without probable cause. The list was growing. A black sedan pulled up beside us. The driver's door opened, and a man in his late 50s stepped out, silver hair combed back with precision, a gray suit that probably costs more than most people's monthly rent. Jose Brown released me immediately and stepped back. The shift was instant, predator to servant in half a second. Mr. Allen, we have a situation here. This individual claims he inherited property in our community. Christopher Allen walked toward me slowly, examining me like a landlord inspecting an unwanted tenant. He stopped close enough that I could smell his cologne. Expensive, overwhelming. I'm the president of Willow Creek Homeowners Association, he said. Whatever papers you think you have, they mean nothing here. I decide who belongs and who doesn't. Turn around and leave. I started to respond, but movement near the guard booth caught my attention. 50 feet away, 2 more security officers were forcing an elderly man into a patrol vehicle. He looked about 75, thin, wearing a cardigan and walking shoes. His voice carried across the distance, trembling. "Please, I was just taking my evening walk. I've lived here for 30 years. One officer responded loud enough for everyone to hear. "Curfew violation, pedestrian activity after 8 p.m. requires a permit. Third offense this month. That's a $500 fine and mandatory escort home." The old man's shoulders sagged as the door closed behind him. 30 years in his own neighborhood, and he needed permission to walk after sunset. I watched the entire scene. Christopher Allen watched me watching. He wanted me to see this, wanted me to understand the machine I was challenging. "Mr. Allen," I said, keeping my voice level, "I'll leave for today, but I will be back. This land belongs to me now." Allen leaned closer. "Land is just dirt. Friend, power is what matters. I have power here. You have nothing. Remember that when you're thinking about coming back." He gestured to Brown. "Get his plates, add him to the watch list, and if he shows up again without authorization, hold him until I decide what to do with him." Brown smiled at that, the smile of a man who enjoyed his work far too much. I drove away without another word. In my jacket pocket, my fingers brushed against the leather wallet that held my credentials. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Arthur Reed, 15 years of service. But I didn't reach for it, not yet. I pulled over at a gas station 2 miles outside Willow Creek and opened my phone. The text message arrived before I even parked. Unknown number. "This is Willow Creek HOA security. Your vehicle has been flagged. Return without authorization. And you will be reported for trespassing and harassment. Do not test us." I screenshot the message, created a new folder, named it Evidence. Then I opened my Notes app and typed from memory, Jose Brown, physical restraint, illegal search, Christopher Allen, directing unlawful detention, elderly resident fined for walking, Title 18, Section 9, 12, impersonating law enforcement, Title 18, Section 2, 42, deprivation of rights under color of law. They had no idea what they had just started, and I intended to finish it. 10 days later, I returned to Willow Creek. This time, I came prepared, court-certified inheritance documents, county land surveys, the original ground lease from 1972, everything notarized, stamped, and legally unassailable. I wore a button-down shirt and slacks, professional, non-threatening, and most importantly, I left my FBI credentials locked in my apartment safe. I wanted to see exactly how far these people would go when they believed they were dealing with an ordinary citizen. Before leaving, I activated the recording app on my phone and synced it with my smartwatch. Redundant systems. If they took one device, the other would keep running. Then I called my colleague at the regional FBI office. "I'm heading back to Willow Creek. If you don't hear from me in 4 hours, start the protocol." She didn't ask questions. She knew what I was building. The gate looked the same as before. Iron bars, cameras, guard booth. But this time, Jose Brown was already waiting outside, arms crossed, 3 additional security officers flanking him like soldiers awaiting inspection. He spotted my car before I even reached the entrance and stepped into the middle of the road, forcing me to stop. Well, he said as I rolled down my window. "The trespasser returns. I warned you what would happen." I held up the folder containing my documents. "I have the inheritance certificate, court verified. I have the deed transfer. I have the original lease agreement showing this entire community sits on land that now belongs to me. I'm requesting access to inspect my property." Brown took the folder from my hands. He flipped it open, scanned the first page, then looked up at me with theatrical disappointment. "You know what this is?" He gripped the certificate with both hands and tore it down the middle. The sound cut through the morning air like a verdict. "Trash, forgery, anyone with a printer can make these." The pieces fluttered to the asphalt. "I want to speak with Christopher Allen," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to pulse through my veins. "Mr. Allen doesn't meet with trespassers. Step out of the vehicle." Brown's hand moved to his belt, not to his cuffs this time, to something else. A black cylinder with 2 metal prongs at the tip. A stun gun. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Step out, or I'll remove you myself." I turned off the engine and opened my door slowly. The moment my feet touched the ground, 2 officers grabbed my arms from behind. A third moved to my car and began searching the interior. Brown circled in front of me, the stun gun still in his hand. "You are being detained for criminal trespass and obstruction of community security operations. You have no rights here. This is private property, and I am the law." The words hit me like a confession. I am the law. He actually believed it. Or worse, he wanted me to believe it. They spun me around and slammed me against the hood of my own car. Metal handcuffs clicked around my wrists, cold and tight. One of the officers pulled my phone from my pocket and tossed it to Brown. "Recording app is running," the officer reported. Brown examined the screen, then smiled. "Trying to gather evidence, that's obstruction. Additional charge." He powered off the phone and slipped it into his own pocket. They didn't find the smartwatch. It sat on my wrist, disguised as an ordinary fitness tracker, still recording every word. They shoved me into the back of a patrol SUV. No seatbelt, no explanation of where we were going. The vehicle drove deeper into Willow Creek, past manicured lawns and identical houses, until we reached a building marked Community Management Center. Inside, they led me down a corridor with no windows and into a small room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a single camera mounted in the corner. The door locked behind me with a heavy click. 3 hours. That's how long they kept me in that room. No phone call, no lawyer, no formal charges, no reading of rights, just a locked door and silence. But I wasn't idle. I studied everything I could see. The camera had a blinking red light, meaning it was recording. If their system kept archives, that footage would become evidence. Through the small window in the door, I could see a desk in the hallway. On it sat a thick logbook with detention records written on the spine. From my angle, I counted at least 200 pages, filled with names and dates, 200 pages of people they had done this to. On the wall behind the desk hung a map of Willow Creek, with dozens of red pins marking specific houses. Problem residents, I assumed, targets. A young security officer opened the door and set a cup of water on the table. He was maybe 25, with nervous eyes that wouldn't meet mine. "Sorry about the wait," he mumbled, then retreated quickly. He didn't belong here. I could see it in his posture. He was following orders he didn't believe in. I filed that observation away for later. The door opened again an hour later. Christopher Allen stepped inside, his gray suit immaculate, his expression carrying the satisfied calm of a man visiting a trophy room. Mr. Reed, Arthur Reed." He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table. "I looked you up. No criminal record, no history of mental illness, just a man who seems convinced he owns something in my community." He leaned forward. "Let me be clear. I don't care what papers you have. I don't care what lawyers you hire. This is my world. These are my rules, and people who challenge me tend to regret it." I said nothing. I let him talk. Every word was being recorded on my wrist. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the door. "Release him, but if he comes back again, hold him overnight. We'll file stalking charges and let the real police sort it out." The cuffs came off, leaving red marks that would bruise by morning. They escorted me to my car, tossed my phone onto the driver's seat, and watched as I drove away. I pulled into a supermarket parking lot 2 miles from Willow Creek and checked my smartwatch. 3 hours and 17 minutes of continuous audio. Every threat, every admission, every illegal act, documented in their own voices. I called my FBI colleague. "I'm out. I'm safe." She exhaled with relief. And I looked at the red marks circling my wrists. I have enough to open a federal investigation, false imprisonment, deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy, and that's just from today. I ended the call and sat in silence for a moment, processing everything I had witnessed. This wasn't a neighborhood association. It was a criminal enterprise wearing a community's skin, and I was going to tear it apart from the inside out. My apartment became a command center within 48 hours. 3 monitors are arranged on my desk, a whiteboard mounted on the wall across from my bed, stacks of printed documents organized by category land records, corporate filings, public complaints, news clippings. This was how I worked every federal case: methodical, thorough, patient. The only difference was that this time, I was both the investigator and the victim. The bruises on my wrists had turned purple overnight, a reminder that Christopher Allen's operation had already crossed lines that would put ordinary criminals behind bars. But I wasn't interested in ordinary charges. I wanted to understand the full scope of what they had built. And then I wanted to dismantle it completely. I started with the legal framework. Title 18 of the United States Code would be my foundation. Section 912 covered impersonating federal officers or employees, but it could extend to anyone creating the false impression of government authority. Penalty up to 3 years. Section 242 addressed deprivation of rights under color of law, meaning anyone acting with apparent legal authority who violated constitutional rights. Penalty up to 10 years, or B if the violation resulted in death. Section 1951, the Hobbs Act, criminalized extortion through actual or threatened force. If they used their fake police powers to extract money from residents, that was federal extortion, penalty up to 20 years. And Section 1956 covered money laundering. If the fines and fees they collected flowed through accounts designed to hide their origin or purpose, another 20 years could stack on top. I mapped each statute to specific behaviors I had witnessed or experienced. The picture was clear. This wasn't petty HOA overreach. This was organized crime operating behind a suburban facade. The first email arrived 3 days after my detention. Anonymous sender, generic subject line, but the content was specific. I heard what they did to you at the gate. You're not the first. They've been doing this for years. If you're serious about fighting back, I can introduce you to others. I responded carefully, suggesting a meeting outside Willow Creek at a coffee shop in the neighboring town. 2 days later, I sat across from Nancy Adams. She was 68 years old, a retired school teacher with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee, but her voice was steady. 6 months ago, they arrested me in my own driveway, said I was hosting an unauthorized gathering. It was my granddaughter's birthday party. 8 children, cake and balloons. She paused, collecting herself. They took me to that room, kept me for 4 hours. When they finally let me go, my necklace was gone, my mother's gold chain. I've worn it every day for 30 years. Her eyes glistened. I asked Jose Brown about it. He said I must have lost it during processing. Processing, like I was a criminal. Nancy connected me with 4 more residents over the following week. Each story followed the same pattern. Minor infractions, real or invented, aggressive detention, confiscation of personal property, fines that climbed into the thousands. One man had been arrested 3 times for parking his own car in his own driveway at the wrong angle. A woman faced weekly citations for her garden flowers exceeding the approved color palette. Another family paid over $12,000 in fees after their teenage son played basketball in the street after 6 p.m. None of them had ever seen actual police involvement. None had been read their rights. None had access to legal representation during detention. The security officers operated as judge, jury, and collection agency, answering only to Christopher Allen. I documented every testimony, dates, times, names, financial records, photographs of injuries. The evidence folder grew thicker by the day. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Abigail Jones was 71, a former bank auditor who had served on the HOA's finance committee before being abruptly removed 2 years earlier. She contacted me through Nancy and agreed to meet at the same coffee shop. Unlike the others, she didn't come with stories of detention. She came with numbers. I noticed discrepancies during my 2nd month on the committee, she explained, sliding a manila folder across the table. Payments to contractors I couldn't verify, transfers to accounts with no clear purpose. When I asked questions, Christopher Allen told me the information was above my clearance level. A week later, I was removed from the committee for performance concerns. The folder contained photocopies of financial statements from her tenure, income from fines and fees over $300,000 in 2 years, expenditures to Willow Security Services for equipment and personnel, $180,000. Payments to various contractors for maintenance and improvements, another $200,000. But when Abigail cross-referenced the contractor names with state business registries, she found nothing. No websites, no physical addresses, no tax filings, just names on paper and money flowing into the void. I ran my own search on Willow Security Services that night. The company had been registered 26 months earlier with the state secretary's office, registered agent a law firm downtown, but the ownership documents told the real story. Sole proprietor Christopher Allen, he didn't just run the HOA, he owned the private army enforcing his rules. Every fine, every detention, every confiscated piece of property flowed through a company he controlled completely. Jose Brown wasn't just a security guard, he was Christopher Allen's employee, paid to intimidate residents and generate revenue. This wasn't HOA mismanagement. This was a criminal enterprise designed to extract money from an entire community through fear, fake authority, and systematic abuse. I called my team leader at the FBI regional office. I need to open an official file. Case name Willow Creek, subjects Christopher Allen, Jose Brown, and unknown associates, charges conspiracy to deprive civil rights, extortion, money laundering, and fraud. This is bigger than one bad neighborhood. This is a RICO case waiting to happen. She listened to my summary, asked several clarifying questions, and then gave her approval. Build the file. I'll assign support. But Arthur, be careful. Men like this don't go down quietly. I hung up and looked at the whiteboard. Christopher Allen's name sat in the center, connected by red lines to Jose Brown, to Willow Security Services, to a growing list of victims and violations. The web was taking shape, and soon it would become a trap. The counterattack began exactly 2 weeks after my last meeting with Abigail Jones. I discovered it the way most people discover they've been targeted through a stranger's phone call. A former colleague from my academy days reached out unexpectedly. Arthur, I just saw something online about you. Some community page in the suburbs. They're saying you're running a property scam targeting elderly homeowners. I thanked him for the heads up and started searching. Within an hour, I found my own face staring back at me from dozens of posts across local neighborhood forums. The photograph was grainy, clearly taken from a distance on the day I first arrived at Willow Creek's gate. Someone had added text in bold red letters. Warning, this individual is approaching residents claiming to own their land. Suspected con artist. Do not engage. Report sightings to HOA security immediately. The comments section beneath each post followed an identical pattern. Accounts created within the past 48 hours, all echoing the same phrases. Thank God for our HOA protecting us. Security keeps our families safe. Don't let outsiders destroy our community. The coordination was obvious to anyone trained to spot it. Fake accounts, manufactured outrage, a digital smokescreen designed to discredit me before I could establish credibility with anyone inside Willow Creek. But Christopher Allen had made a mistake. Every post, every comment, every accusation constituted potential evidence of defamation, harassment, and witness intimidation. I documented everything systematically, screenshots with timestamps, metadata extraction where possible, IP traces that I would later request through proper federal channels. They thought they were burying me. Instead, they were building my case. The legal assault arrived 3 days later. A thick envelope bearing the return address of a downtown law firm landed in my mailbox. Inside, I found a formal cease and desist letter demanding that I immediately halt all contact with Willow Creek residents and abandon any claims to property within the community. The letter accused me of trespassing, harassment, elder manipulation, and fraudulent misrepresentation. At the bottom, a settlement offer pay $50,000 within 30 days, and the HOA would agree not to pursue criminal charges. I almost laughed. Criminal charges required actual crimes and actual law enforcement. Christopher Allen had neither. But attached to the letter was something more concerning. A copy of a motion filed with the county court, requesting a temporary restraining order prohibiting me from coming within 500 feet of any Willow Creek property or resident. The motion cited my previous visits as evidence of stalking behavior and claimed that multiple residents feared for their safety. I recognized the strategy immediately: bury the target in legal proceedings, drain their resources, create a paper trail that makes them look like the aggressor. It was the same playbook used by corporations to silence whistleblowers. I called a real estate attorney who specialized in property disputes and HOA litigation. She reviewed my inheritance documents within a day and confirmed what I already knew. Your ownership is ironclad. The ground lease is valid. And their attempt to bar the landowner from accessing his own property is not just frivolous, it's potentially sanctionable. I asked her to file a response to the restraining order and to prepare a counter-motion establishing my legal rights. Then I added the lawsuit to my evidence file and returned to work. But something in the court documents caught my attention. The motion had been signed by a county judge whose name seemed familiar. I searched my records and found it buried in a campaign finance report from 3 years earlier. Christopher Allen had donated $15,000 to that judge's re-election campaign. 2 other members of the HOA board had contributed an additional $8,000. The judge who would decide whether I could access my own land had received $23,000 from the people trying to keep me out. I flagged the information for my FBI file and added a new line to my whiteboard: potential judicial corruption, follow the money. Nancy Adams called me that evening with news that shifted everything. "I've been talking to more people," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "One of them used to work in the HOA's accounting office. She told me something about Jose Brown." I listened as Nancy relayed what she had learned. Jose Brown received a regular salary from Willow Security Services, Christopher Allen's private company. That much I already knew. But the accounting clerk had seen a second payment stream, every month. Brown received an additional deposit from something called the Community Enhancement Fund, a discretionary account controlled solely by Christopher Allen with no board oversight. The payments totaled over $40,000 annually, on top of his official salary, money with no clear justification, no documented services rendered, just cash flowing from Allen's personal slush fund to his chief enforcer. "There's more," Nancy continued. She said some of the fines collected from residents never made it into the official HOA accounts. They went somewhere else. She doesn't know where, but she said the numbers never added up. I hung up and stared at my whiteboard. Christopher Allen is at the center. Jose Brown is connected by a thick red line. Willow Security Services feeds into both. The Community Enhancement Fund is a hidden pipeline, victim names scattered around the edges, each one representing money extracted through fear and false authority. And now, a trail of missing funds that suggested the operation was even larger than I had estimated. The HOA's annual meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. According to their own bylaws, any party with a legitimate interest in community affairs could request time to address the board. I was the legal owner of 1,000 acres beneath their feet. If that wasn't a legitimate interest, nothing was. I drafted a formal letter requesting a speaking slot at the meeting and sent it by certified mail to the HOA's registered address. Then I began preparing my presentation. Not all of it, just enough to force them into a reaction, just enough to make them show their true faces in front of everyone they had spent years deceiving. Christopher Allen thought he was fighting a property dispute. He had no idea he was walking into a federal investigation. And in 2 weeks, the whole world would watch him fall. The Willow Creek Community Center was a sprawling single-story building with floor-to-ceiling windows and fluorescent lighting that made everyone inside look slightly ill. I arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes before the annual meeting was scheduled to begin. The parking lot was already half full: minivans, sedans, a few luxury vehicles clustered near the entrance. These were the residents who had lived under Christopher Allen's regime for years. Some had been fined, some had been detained, some had simply learned to keep their heads down and their opinions silent. Tonight, they would witness something none of them expected. I parked at the far end of the lot, away from the security patrol vehicles positioned near the building's main entrance. In my briefcase, I carried the inheritance documents, the land surveys, and a carefully organized summary of evidence. In my jacket pocket, my FBI credentials waited. Everything was in position. Before leaving my car, I sent a single text message to my colleague at the regional office. "I'm going in, be ready." The community hall held approximately 120 residents by the time I walked through the door. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table at the front of the room, where Christopher Allen sat in the center position like a king presiding over his court. Jose Brown stood to his right, hands clasped in front of him, scanning the crowd with the watchful eyes of a predator. 4 other board members flanked them on either side, none of whom I recognized. I took a seat in the 5th row, close enough to be seen but far enough to observe the room's dynamics. Scattered through the audience, I spotted familiar faces. Nancy Adams sat near the back, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Abigail Jones had positioned herself on the aisle, a manila folder visible beneath her chair. 8 other residents who had shared their stories with me over the past weeks occupied seats throughout the hall. None of us acknowledged each other. We had agreed on that beforehand. Surprise was our only advantage. Christopher Allen opened the meeting with the practiced cadence of a man who had delivered the same performance dozens of times before. Budget summaries read without detail, maintenance updates are described in vague terms, security reports praising the continued vigilance of the patrol team. Then he announced a proposed 20% increase in annual fees, citing rising operational costs and enhanced community protection services. No vote was offered, no discussion invited. He simply stated it as fact and moved to the next agenda item. When he reached the public comment period, his eyes found me immediately. The warmth drained from his expression. "I see we have a request from someone who is not a resident of this community," he announced, his voice carrying a sharp edge. "Under our bylaws, only dues-paying members may address this board." I stood before he could continue. Every head in the room turned toward me. "Your bylaws grant speaking rights to any party with legitimate legal interest in community affairs," I said, keeping my voice calm and clear. "My name is Arthur Reed. 3 months ago, my Aunt Michelle Carter passed away and left me her estate. That estate includes 1,000 acres of land, the same 1,000 acres on which every home in Willow Creek was built." I held up the inheritance certificate, the one with the court seal and the notary stamps. "This document was certified by the county probate court. It establishes my legal ownership of the ground beneath your feet. I am not a trespasser. I am not a con artist. I am your landlord." The room erupted in whispers. Residents turned to each other with expressions of confusion and alarm. Christopher Allen's face hardened into a mask of controlled fury. He raised his hand for silence, then gestured sharply to his right. "Mr. Brown, please escort this individual out of our meeting. He is disrupting official proceedings and making fraudulent claims designed to frighten our residents." Jose Brown stepped forward from his position at the front table. His hand moved to his belt, fingers wrapping around the familiar shape of his handcuffs. He walked down the center aisle toward me, with the measured pace of a man who had done this many times before. Residents in adjacent seats shrank back, creating a clear path. Mr. Reed," Brown said, stopping 3 feet in front of me. "You are under arrest for trespassing, disruption of community operations, and fraudulent misrepresentation. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." He reached for my shoulder. His fingers made contact with the fabric of my jacket, and that was the last mistake he would ever make in that uniform. I stepped back smoothly, creating space between us, and reached into my jacket pocket. The leather wallet came out with practiced ease. I flipped it open and held it at eye level, facing Jose Brown directly. The gold badge caught the fluorescent light. The blue letters spelled out 3 words that changed everything. "Special Agent Arthur Reed, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words landed like a physical blow. Jose Brown's hand froze in midair. The color drained from his face so quickly that I thought he might collapse on the spot. His eyes fixed on the badge, then darted to my face, then back to the badge, as if his brain was refusing to process what he was seeing. Behind him, I heard Christopher Allen rise from his chair. "You just attempted to arrest a federal agent," I continued, my voice carrying across the silent room. "That is a felony under Title 18, Section 111 of the United States Code. Assaulting or impeding a federal officer in the performance of official duties. Maximum penalty 8 years in federal prison." I turned slightly so the entire audience could see my credentials. "For the past 2 months, I have been investigating the activities of Willow Creek's security operations, false imprisonment, extortion, theft of personal property, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The evidence has already been submitted to the United States Attorney's Office." Christopher Allen pushed past the board members and strode toward me, his composure cracking for the first time since I had met him. "This is absurd. That badge is fake. He's a con man. Someone call the real police. Call them right now." As if on cue, the main doors of the community center swung open. 4 figures entered, 2 in dark suits with FBI credentials visible on their belts, 2 in the unmistakable tan uniforms of state troopers. My colleague from the regional office caught my eye and nodded. "We received your signal, Agent Reed. We're ready to proceed." Jose Brown's handcuffs clattered to the floor. He hadn't dropped them intentionally. His hands had simply stopped working. He stood frozen in the center of the aisle, staring at the federal agents approaching from both directions, his world collapsing around him in real time. Christopher Allen tried one last time. "This is private property. You have no jurisdiction here. I want to see a warrant." I stepped closer to him, close enough that only he could hear my next words. "I am the property owner, Mr. Allen. I have absolute jurisdiction over every inch of this land. And as for warrants, the agents behind me are carrying 3 of them, one for your home, one for your office, and one for your arrest." For the first time since I had met him, Christopher Allen had nothing to say. His mouth opened and closed without sound. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The king of Willow Creek had just discovered that his kingdom was built on borrowed ground, and the landlord had finally come to collect. The community center erupted into chaos the moment my credentials left their case. Residents leaped from their chairs. Some rushed toward the exits. Others pressed forward, shouting questions that blurred into a wall of noise. Christopher Allen reached for his phone, but a state trooper intercepted him before his fingers touched the screen. "Sir, I'm going to need you to keep your hands where I can see them." Jose Brown finally unfroze. His survival instincts kicked in, and he bolted toward the side door marked "Emergency Exit Only." He made it exactly 4 steps before 2 FBI agents cut off his path. One of them, a woman I had worked with on a racketeering case 3 years prior, stepped directly into his trajectory. "Jose Brown, you are under arrest for deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment, and assault on a federal officer. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs that had terrorized so many Willow Creek residents now closed around his own wrists. The click echoed through the hall, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Christopher Allen attempted one final performance. He straightened his jacket, composed his features into an expression of still dignified outrage, and addressed my colleagues as if he were still in control. "This is a misunderstanding. I am Christopher Allen. I am the president of this homeowners association and a respected member of this community. I demand to speak with my attorney before any further action is taken." The state trooper who had stopped him from reaching his phone stepped forward with a folded document. Mr. Allen, this is a federal arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court. You are being charged with conspiracy to deprive civil rights, extortion under the Hobbs Act, wire fraud, and money laundering. Additional charges may be filed pending further investigation." He read the Miranda rights in a steady monotone. Allen's mask cracked slightly with each word. By the time the trooper finished, the man who had told me he was the law in Willow Creek stood with his hands cuffed behind his back, no different from the hundreds of residents his security force had detained over the years. The symmetry was not lost on anyone watching. 2 more security officers who had participated in my detention were identified and taken into custody, but the moment that crystallized everything came from an unexpected direction. A young man in a Willow Creek security uniform approached my FBI colleague voluntarily. I recognized him immediately. He was the nervous officer who had brought me water during my 3-hour imprisonment, the one who couldn't meet my eyes. "My name is Tyler," he said, his voice unsteady but determined. "I've worked here for 8 months. I want to cooperate. I'll tell you everything I know, everything they made me do." My colleague glanced at me. I nodded. "Get him somewhere private. Record every word. He might be the key to filling the gaps we haven't found yet." Tyler's testimony would later prove invaluable, but we didn't know that yet. What we knew was that the wall Christopher Allen had built was crumbling, and every person who stepped forward accelerated its collapse. The next 48 hours transformed Willow Creek into an active crime scene. FBI evidence teams descended on the HOA Management Center, the security office, and Christopher Allen's personal residence. I supervised portions of the search, watching as agents cataloged the machinery of oppression that had operated in plain sight for years. The detention logbook I had glimpsed during my imprisonment contained 217 entries spanning 3 years. Each entry documented a resident being held without legal authority, without access to counsel, without any connection to actual law enforcement. Some detentions lasted hours, some lasted overnight. None had ever been reported to any official agency. The financial records painted an even darker picture. Total revenue from fines, fees, and processing charges exceeded $420,000 over the same period. 60% of that money had flowed directly into accounts controlled by Christopher Allen. The rest was distributed among his inner circle, with Jose Brown receiving the largest share after Allen himself. The safe in Jose Brown's office required a locksmith to open. Inside, agents found a collection that made even veteran investigators pause. Jewelry, watches, cash bundled in rubber bands, credit cards with names that didn't match any security personnel. Each item represented a theft disguised as evidence collection or security processing. Nancy Adams's gold necklace was there, tagged with a date and her address. We photographed it in place before bagging it for evidence. She would get it back eventually, but first, it would help send the man who took it to prison. The surveillance system yielded another treasure trove. Christopher Allen had installed cameras throughout the community center, including the detention room. He had intended them as protection, a record that would support his version of events if anyone ever challenged his authority. Instead, they became a catalog of crimes. Hours of footage showed residents being restrained, threatened, and processed through a system designed to extract money and obedience. One video file, dated 3 years earlier, stopped me cold. An 82-year-old man named Harold Winters was being escorted into the detention room by 2 security officers. The footage showed him stumbling on the threshold. One officer yanked his arm to keep him upright. Harold collapsed against the doorframe, then slid to the floor. The officers stood over him for nearly a minute before one finally knelt to check his condition. Harold Winters was transported to a hospital that night. He died 2 weeks later from complications related to the fall. No incident report was ever filed. No notification was sent to law enforcement. His death was buried as quietly as everything else that happened behind Willow Creek's iron gates. I copied the footage personally and flagged it for the prosecuting attorney. This was no longer just about fraud and false imprisonment. A man had died, and the people responsible had covered it up to protect themselves. My colleague approached me as I stood in Christopher Allen's former office, staring at a framed photograph on the wall. Allen is shaking hands with local politicians. Allen at a charity gala with county officials. Allen is receiving an award from the Chamber of Commerce. "The financial trail goes further than we expected," she said. "His donations weren't just to one judge. We've found contributions to at least 2 members of the county judiciary and 1 state legislator. All of them received funding through shell companies connected to the HOA accounts." I looked at the photograph one more time. The smiling faces, the handshakes, the veneer of respectability. Then I turned to my colleague. "Expand the investigation. Every politician who took his money, every official who looked the other way. We're not done until the whole network is exposed." She nodded and left to make the calls. Behind me, agents continued boxing evidence. Outside, news vans were beginning to gather at the community gates. The dominoes were falling, and they would not stop until they reached the very last one, 8 months after the collapse at Willow Creek. I walked into the federal courthouse wearing a dark suit and carrying a briefcase full of evidence I had helped compile. The building was a monument of marble and glass, designed to project the weight and permanence of justice. Camera crews clustered outside the entrance, held back by barriers and uniformed marshals. News anchors delivered breathless updates to audiences across the state. The trial of Christopher Allen and Jose Brown had captured public attention in ways that surprised even the prosecution team. Perhaps it was the scope of the crimes. Perhaps it was the brazenness of men who had built a private police state in the middle of suburban America. Whatever the reason, the courtroom gallery was packed to capacity when the proceedings began. I took my seat in the witness section, surrounded by faces I had come to know well over the past months. Nancy Adams sat 3 rows behind me, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the defendant's table with an intensity that needed no words. The prosecution opened with a systematic presentation of the charges. Christopher Allen faced 5 counts spanning multiple federal statutes: conspiracy to deprive civil rights under Title 18, Section 241, carrying a maximum sentence of 10 years, extortion under the Hobbs Act, Section 1951, with exposure up to 20 years, wire fraud for using electronic communications to further his schemes, another 20 years, money laundering through his network of shell companies and phantom contractors, Section 1956, adding 20 more years of potential imprisonment, And finally, obstruction of justice for destroying financial records after learning of the FBI investigation. The judge read each charge slowly, allowing the full weight of the accusations to settle over the courtroom. Jose Brown's charges were equally severe: impersonating law enforcement under Section 912, multiple counts of false imprisonment, robbery for the property stolen from detained residents, assault causing bodily injury for the violence captured on surveillance footage, and assault on a federal officer for his attempt to arrest me at the community meeting. I testified on the third day of trial. The prosecutor walked me through my initial visit to Willow Creek, my detention, and the investigation that followed. I kept my answers precise and factual, resisting the urge to editorialize. The evidence spoke loudly enough on its own. Defense attorneys attempted to portray me as a rogue agent pursuing a personal vendetta over a property dispute. They suggested I had entrapped their clients by concealing my identity. I reminded them that I had no obligation to announce my profession to people who were busy violating federal law. The judge sustained most of the prosecution's objections. By the time I stepped down from the witness stand, the defense's strategy lay in tatters. The victims testified over the following week. Nancy Adams described her detention, the theft of her mother's necklace, and the months of anxiety that followed. Her voice wavered only once, when she recounted asking Jose Brown about her missing jewelry and receiving nothing but a smirk in response. When the prosecutor held up the recovered necklace, now sealed in an evidence bag, Nancy had to look away to compose herself. Abigail Jones presented the financial evidence with the precision of the auditor she had once been. She walked the jury through spreadsheets showing money flowing from resident fines into phantom contractor accounts, then cycling back into Christopher Allen's personal holdings, the shell companies, the forged invoices. The systematic theft is disguised as community management. By the time she finished, several jurors were shaking their heads in visible disgust. The elderly man I had watched being detained on my first visit to Willow Creek took the stand to describe his arrest for walking after curfew. His name was Bernard Thompson, a retired postal worker who had lived in Willow Creek for 31 years. He explained how the security officers had treated him like a criminal in his own neighborhood, how they had fined him $300 for the offense of taking an evening stroll. He had stopped going outside after dark because he was afraid of what might happen if they caught him again. His testimony was quiet, dignified, and devastating. The most difficult testimony came from Harold Winters' daughter. She described receiving a phone call informing her that her father had been hospitalized after an incident at the community center. No explanation was given. No incident report was provided. She learned the truth only after the FBI investigation uncovered the surveillance footage. Her father had been 82 years old, a World War II veteran who had survived combat in the Pacific, only to die from injuries sustained at the hands of private security guards in his own community. She wept on the stand. Half the jury wept with her. Christopher Allen stared straight ahead, showing no reaction. Jose Brown kept his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just under 5 hours. They returned with guilty verdicts on all major charges for both defendants. Christopher Allen closed his eyes when the foreperson read the final count. Jose Brown slumped in his chair as if the air had been let out of him. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The judge, a veteran of the federal bench with a reputation for measured decisions, addressed the defendants directly before announcing his ruling. "You exploited positions of trust to terrorize the very people you claim to protect," he said, his voice carrying the quiet weight of moral authority. "You created a system designed to extract money through fear. You deprived citizens of their constitutional rights. And in the case of Harold Winters, your actions contributed to the death of a man who deserved to live his final years in peace." He turned first to Christopher Allen. "For the crimes of conspiracy, extortion, wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice, I sentence you to 22 years in federal prison, without possibility of parole for the first 15 years. You are further ordered to pay restitution for $1.4 million to the victims of your schemes." Allen's attorney requested permission to speak. The judge denied it. Then he addressed Jose Brown. "For impersonating law enforcement, false imprisonment, robbery, assault, and assault on a federal officer, I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison. You are ordered to pay restitution for $600,000. The 3 other security officers who had participated in the operation received sentences ranging from 4 to 8 years, depending on their level of involvement. Tyler, the young officer who had cooperated from the beginning, received probation and community service in exchange for his testimony. The gavel fell. Marshals led the defendants away in handcuffs. The gallery erupted in a mixture of applause and tears. I remained seated, watching Christopher Allen disappear through the side door. He never looked back. He never acknowledged the people whose lives he had damaged. But justice did not require his acknowledgement. Justice only required his accountability, and that, at last, had been delivered. 18 months after the trial, I drove through Willow Creek's entrance for the first time as a welcomed visitor. The iron gates remained, but the guard booth stood empty. No patrol vehicles with flashing lights. No men in black uniforms demanding papers. The cameras still watched, but now they served the residents rather than a regime. The old HOA had been dissolved by court order. In its place, residents established the Willow Creek Community Association, a democratic body with rotating leadership, term limits, and transparent finances. Every budget decision required an open vote. Every expenditure faced an independent audit. No single person would ever again hold the power that Christopher Allen had wielded. I parked near the community center, the same building where I had revealed my badge and watched an empire crumble. Inside, a small ceremony was underway. Nancy Adams stood at the front of the room, her mother's gold necklace restored to its rightful place around her neck. The restitution fund had returned every stolen item that could be recovered, along with financial compensation for those whose property had been sold or destroyed. Bernard Thompson, the man arrested for walking after curfew, had received $45,000 in damages. He used part of it to install a bench in the community park, engraved with 4 words, "Freedom has no curfew." Harold Winters' daughter received $200,000 and a formal acknowledgement from the court that her father's death resulted from the actions of Willow Creek Security. Nothing could bring him back, but his story would be remembered. I established the Michelle Carter Legal Defense Fund in my aunt's name. The organization provides free legal assistance to residents facing HOA abuse across the country. In its first year, the fund helped 43 families challenge unlawful fines, fraudulent liens, and illegal detention. As I walked through Willow Creek that evening, children played on lawns without fear of citation. Neighbors gathered on porches without requesting permits. An elderly couple strolled past me in the fading light, holding hands, taking their time. It was almost 9 o'clock. No one stopped them. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because power belongs to those who refuse to let it be stolen.